start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United
Allegiance
States
to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We don't have any public comment today, so we'll go to 4, approval of the January 9th and January 22nd, 2024 Public Safety Committee minutes and joint Public Safety and Health and Human Services Committee meeting minutes. Motion made and second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. 5, policy issues discussion and potential committee determination. None. 6, operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, or policy. A, opportunity for providing recommendations relative to items to be included in the Administrator's 2024 annual work plan. So why this was put on there is we had a executive committee meeting, and it was brought up that we probably should bring this to our standing committees just to get some input from the committee. So this is your opportunity to, I'm sure you all went through it, see if you could add anything or any questions, comments for Administrator Leonard. Go ahead, Supervisor Marash.
Thank you. We had the diversion program presentations, and we talked about at the time having Administrator Leonard review the returns on investment for the diversion programs, specifically the alcohol court, only having 3 participants, and what could be done to make that more effective. Not saying we should get rid of it at all, just so everybody's not upset about what I'm saying, because that's not what I mean. But just to go through and figure out which programs are working the best, what can be done better, etc. That's one thing. Also, in the work plan on M, way down at the bottom in red, with the marijuana zoning ordinance, I would still appreciate that being looked at, because I think that as time goes on, they're going to push more and more to legalize marijuana. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Administrator Leonard, would you like to comment on the alcohol court?
I include that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as you alluded to, really the opportunity here is to provide that feedback. What is in your packet is actually the 2023 update. So there are a number of holdover or rollover projects that just I think can be helpful for me to go through real quickly. I won't go through the entire document, as the chair indicated. I think you certainly have had the opportunity to do that yourself. But as Supervisor Marash said, one of those pieces that is really a new project, but it's really a rollover from the budget. I did write in the budget that I was going to provide to the county board an evaluation and recommendation relative to the second treatment court, because we did have those issues with regard to utilization. So certainly I think that is something that I will include in the 2024 work plan. But in terms of kind of rollover projects that I think this committee should just know that I'm going to have on the work plan, with the Regional Forensic Science Center moving forward, I'm going to put an item on there relative to construction and preparing for commencement of operations. That's going to be, quite honestly, a lot of work. But just to, I know this committee would find that important. Second is development of a countywide vehicle fleet program. This really is going to impact every department, but you had discussions at this committee about the sheriff's office moving to the enterprise fleet management program, and we did that last year. We're going to look to kind of expand that, and certainly one of the departments that has been very vocal to me about their desire to do that is the district attorney's office, with some of their programs to provide a stable availability for fleet vehicles. We're going to do a presentation. We hope to do that presentation in May to start our delivery of quarterly financial reports to each of the standing committees for the departments under their jurisdiction. So that's a project that I think you'll be interested in. Certainly the opioid settlement funding distribution that you, Mr. Chair, just referenced with the joint minutes that were approved earlier. the Criminal Justice, Coordinating Council. That's going to be a continued allocation of my time that is in the 2023 plan that will continue. Certainly, we continue to do a lot of work on the development of a countywide dashboard, starting again in the justice system. And we actually just held a meeting with the district attorney's office earlier this week. And then the last two projects, one has been a project that has been talked about for a long time, and I'm not advocating to move this forward, but just to keep it in front of the committee. The needs assessment and feasibility study relative to alternative models to deliver emergency medical services, EMS services, through a countywide system. That is kind of a continuing discussion point and something that the county board will need to determine whether or not to prioritize. And then you're going to receive a presentation in just a few minutes about the Assembly's work group that has been meeting to update section 12.04. So at least for the time being, it's going to be a rollover project. I hope to have be able to cross that one off very quickly, because that work group has done exceptionally well, and there's a draft ordinance in front of you, and hopefully that goes through the county board, and the county board makes whatever changes it feels appropriate. But those are the kind of rollover projects from 2023. Otherwise, certainly I think Supervisor Marash has two things. I can get additional information on those and build those into the work plan. But any other feedback you have about challenges that you think the county's facing that you want to have a potential evaluation completed, or help the county board complete that evaluation by bringing information forward, greatly appreciate any feedback you could give at this point to include in the work plan.
Anything further for Administrator Leonard? Okay, thank you, Lance. With that, we'll move on to 6B. Marathon County Assembly.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep. Marathon County Assembly's Ordinance 12.04, review of draft ordinance updates and consideration of forwarding to County Board.
Right. I'll go ahead and start it off, and I know Administrator Leonard might have a few things he wants to add as well, but our group was here in October giving you all an update on the Assembly's ordinance. As a reminder, it not only is it in the Administrator's work plan, but in August of 2022, several parts of it were found as they exist in our ordinance to be unenforceable. So there was a work group consisting of members from public safety, environmental resources, and infrastructure who have been meeting for the last several months to prepare a draft to bring back before these committees and the county board for consideration of adoption into the Marathon County Code of Ordinances. So when we met with you in October, we did receive some comments from the different committees. We also did outreach to the towns. Another thing we did, one of the comments that came from the committees was to get more involvement from existing events that we believed this ordinance would apply to, such as the STEAM show and Taste and Glow. So we did do outreach to them, and I'll circle back to that in a minute. We do have a representative here from the STEAM show as well today. And the work group worked with them as well as several county departments to come up with the draft that is before you today. I'm going to kind of summarize some of the big changes we've made since you've seen it in October, and then we'll open it up to questions as well. One of the things, like I said, that we took into consideration was getting more event input. So we did invite the STEAM show, and they have been coming to our work group meetings. And I'm sure that Kevin Benke from the STEAM show would be more than willing to answer any questions this committee would have as well. We did invite the Taste and Glow as well. I think many of you have heard that the Taste and Glow, as it has existed, may not exist this year. So they haven't been responsive yet to our requests for comment, but we continue to keep them in the loop on everything we're doing, just in case they do reform in some form or fashion this year or next year. So that's one of the things we did and updated since we last met. A lot of the comments we got in the first round too addressed implementation. So people brought forth, what about new events that are coming into the county? How would they know what to do, what resources would we make available for them. Most of those changes and those comments we have not put forth in the ordinance itself, but we are working on extensive implementation materials and resource guides to help new events that would want to come into the county to work with our department and our other county departments so that they could put an application together. You'll also see in your packet we put together an FAQ. That's an FAQ that is the audience would be prospective applicants for the most part, so they could start to see what things they need to address, trying to figure out what questions they have and give them a little bit of guidance. But Garrett Poggle, our zoning specialist at CPZ, has been working on a number of resource materials too, including how to figure out how many toilets you might need, information about putting together an emergency action plan, things like that. And of course, if this were to be adopted, our staff would be available to any applicant to work them through the application process. Another thing that came up in the first round of comments from the towns especially was town input. So how would towns be involved in giving input to a permit? So there's two ways that we've addressed this in the updated draft. One, there is an appeals section that's been added to section 16 of the draft, and that does say that a town can appeal our decision to issue a permit. There's a timeline in there that's attached to that because obviously we need to make sure that the applicant has enough notice so that they can put their event together, but that the town also has a chance to appeal if they disagree with the county's decision to issue a permit. One of the things it does highlight, though, as well, is it says that they cannot appeal based on content or nature of the event. It does have to be something related to public health or safety that they would have to appeal the decision to have an event. The other thing we would do in implementation, of course, is anytime we get an application, we would notify the town that an application had been put in, and then we would immediately notify them once our decision is made, so that way, if they disagree, they would have that opportunity to appeal it. Another thing that came up, and one of the reasons the work group was also formed, was to discuss fees related to these events. There's been concerns over the years that sometimes there are services that go along with these events that are impacting our highways or our sheriff's office, and how would we be addressing those if an applicant is asking for what we're calling extraordinary services. So you will see we do have a definition on page 1 of the draft ordinance related to extraordinary services. And in section 6 on page 2 of the draft ordinance, we've also added how extraordinary services would be addressed. So if an applicant, for example, said that they would like, in their application, they're requesting some support from highways for maybe some barricades or some dynamic message signs or something like that, we would coordinate between the applicant and highways to see, one, if highways could provide those services, and then highways would enter into a separate contract with them for those services, so they would know what the cost was going to be if they were going to use county resources. So we've added that to the draft ordinance. The other thing that came up in our revisions with the work group and with engaging with the STEAM show was security. There were a lot of questions about the security that's been outlined in the draft ordinance, and what it needed to be, or could, where was the leeway. It does say that there'll be one security person for every 3,000 attendees, and we do have the sheriff's office here as well today, or 3 for every 1,000. Sorry, Gary. I got that wrong. I'm rewriting it on the fly. Okay, 3 for every 1,000. Thank you. And we do have the sheriff's office here today who can also explain some of the reasoning behind our security requirements. I think so. We have taken it through to other committees at this point: Environmental Resources Committee and Infrastructure. Infrastructure did go forth with moving it to county board. Environmental Resources Committee was waiting because they wanted us to go back and check on a few things. One being that they brought up the idea of, at a year's time, we would relook at the ordinance. So essentially, to take a look back, see how it's working, and make adjustments as necessary. They would like to see that incorporated. And I believe, I was not here on Thursday, but I believe Infrastructure did pass it through to county board with the suggested change to add that to it. Now, I think what we're recommending is that would be part of the resolution, not part of the ordinance, because I think Corporation Council thinks it makes more sense to put that kind of consideration in a resolution versus the ordinance. So that would just say a year from the time the ordinance goes into effect, the group would look again to see if we need to make updates to the ordinance. So I will look to the sheriff's office or Administrator Leonard to see if there's anything else you all want to add at this point.
I can start, Bill, and then you can, if Bill or Chad, I don't know who else is all there, but on the last piece that Lori referenced, that is exactly what happened with infrastructure. What they had a discussion kind of building on what the Environmental Resources Committee discussed about this idea of, that 1 year check-in, and at Environmental Resources, there was discussion, well, should it be a 1 year check-in or a sunset date for the entire ordinance of 1 year without further action to renew it? And that same, sorry about that. So that same discussion happened at the Infrastructure Committee, and ultimately what the motion that came out of Infrastructure was to move the ordinance as drafted to the full board for consideration, with a provision in the resolution that calls for administration to essentially gather information from event holders over the course of the first year of the ordinance's applicability, and bring that information back to I believe it's the full board or the Environmental Resources Committee, but it does call for that kind of evaluation and report back for then the board to evaluate whether or not modifications to the ordinance are necessary. So that took place. The only other thing I'll say, and Bill, you can address the security discussion if you choose to, but I do think the work group had great discussion on that topic. And I really think the one thing that one of my big takeaways was this work group structure really was pretty successful in bringing together different perspectives from elected officials on the county board, which helps staff because, again, at the end of the day, whether or not this is adopted or the county board is going to regulate in this area is a policy decision for the board. So I think the work group really did quite well, and what we should evaluate whether or not that is something we can utilize in the future. So just a thank you from staff that everyone on the work group put in that time. And thank you, of course, to Mr. Benke, I know is in the room. The STEAM show provided very good information, not only on security, but those discussions really demonstrated for staff the importance of those supporting documents that Lori referenced, the FAQ guide and kind of the application or permit guide that we're going to put together. Trying to keep the ordinance as simple and straightforward as possible, but the conversation was helpful because we identified areas that needed that little bit of extra clarity for applicants as they plan these events. The last thing I'll say is about security, and that is the ratio that Lori referenced. That's actually the same ratio that's in the current version of the ordinance. There was a question at the last meeting kind of about what was the genesis of that. There was a lot of discussion about the ratio and how an event might meet it, which Bill can address if anyone has further concerns, but I just wanted to reference that is actually the requirement under the existing ordinance.
That's your second chance to talk, and since you're not here, Lance, that's all you get. So. Sheriff's Department, do you guys have anything to add? No. All right. Do we have any questions for out there? Go ahead.
How many towns gave you feedback, and was it optimistic, or did they like it or not like it?
I want to say 3 or 4 submitted actual email feedback, but we did go to the Towns Association meetings as well, and we got some verbal feedback at those meetings too. Like I said, I think the biggest concern was how would they be involved in the process, and so that is why they are able to appeal so that they do have the ability to do that. I think that was the biggest concern. The other ones that came up from towns, some of them thought we needed more specifics on certain elements, for example, fencing, like more guidelines in the ordinance on fencing. But again, we made some choices there that we could help through implementation or resource guides versus being too prescriptive in the ordinance in terms of like writing everything out that a person needs to do. So, because some of it's going to depend on their event. So,
Thank you.
Further questions, comments of the committee? So, go ahead. Yeah, and I think the one thing I would kind of say is maybe if we do have a motion, it probably should incorporate with what kind of meet with what finance, infrastructure and finance did. Because could you say, Lance, I'll let you speak one more time. So, can you tell us what they actually?
Sure.
Was it for yeah.
It was it was the infrastructure committee that moved it forward, and I don't have the exact language in front of me, but the motion was to move the ordinance to the full county board for its consideration with a language in the authorizing resolution that calls for that 1 year gathering of information by county administration and bringing it to the county board for its review and consideration of whether to make modifications to the ordinance. So it should go to the county board at your next meeting for consideration, regardless of any action taken here today. The last thing I'll note is I do understand that there's going to be a motion, I believe Supervisor Robinson, who actually made the motion at infrastructure to move this forward, may offer an amendment at the security section to add a phrase that would permit a lower ratio of security personnel if expressly authorized by the sheriff's office. But other than that, that was the motion as is to move it forward to the county board with that 1 year check-in provision.
Supervisor Mask says what you said. Is that good for the motion then? Dave, you got that all wrote down? So the motion on the floor, I assume, Supervisor Mask, okay, and the second, Supervisor Marash. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried. Was that you were an aye, right, Bruce?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Sorry, Lance, I get sassy. I was on vacation, so. 7, educational presentations and committee discussion, juvenile detention center update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A while back, we were at committee and shared with you guys the reorganization, the reopening of the secure detention center, and just kind of wanted to give you guys a recap of where that's at, current date, and historically where we were at and where we've come from, and where we are now. As you know, financials was a big portion of our decision as to whether or not that was something that we could keep open or not, or we could utilize the different business model to make that more profitable, if you will. So just to give you a little bit of background, in 2021, there were 33 counties utilizing the facility for 1,053 bed days combined. And at that time, the revenue was $210,600. The following year in 22, the facility was closed. That was the year that the decision was made to close the facility partway through the year. It was closed for 6 months. At that time, we had 23 counties utilize it for 1,020 combined bed days and $204,000 worth of revenue. 2023 is where we started implementing the new business model. We implemented contracts with counties, gave them the ability to sign on with contract day or bed days. And then there was an increase in our rates as well. And we saw throughout the entire year that model just continued to grow each month. to where we ended up with 46 counties utilizing the facility, 2,904 bed days, and our revenue was $1,191,000. So it's been a tremendous success. Our staff out at the juvenile center have been working tirelessly to make sure that we can continue that business model. And that was our commitment when we reopened it, was that if we could report back that it was feasible and profitable and able to maintain itself, that we would continue to keep it open. So I think the report is that we are very pleased with where we are, and we don't see any reason why it should slide backwards. We have, and I forgot to check, I believe we added one more contract with a county this year so far. There has been a recent change in the housing of 17-year-olds, that they can no longer be housed in an adult correctional facility. So I would anticipate that we would see some that typically would have been waived to adult court and housed in adult correctional facility will now be out at our secure detention. So that may also generate some additional bed days.
Questions?
Do you guys, has corrections been, have you guys been able to hire people? I know that the wages are pretty good here compared to other counties, but what's the situation with corrections and in a juvenile facility, what you have for people?
So for the first time in a long time, I can report back some positive news with staffing as in the corrections division. So as you guys do well know, there was a wage increase and restructuring at the beginning of the year. And we had a pretty big recruitment campaign going on. And as of right now, all of the positions are accounted for with applicants moving through the process. So assuming that they all make it all the way through, we would find ourselves fully staffed. But that there again, there's some steps along the way, backgrounds, psychologicals, things like that, that could wash somebody out. But right now we're in a really good state. So that means we've filled 15 vacancies. So it's really good. Yeah, and then we also have, I think, 3 or 4 residual on deck that are interested as well. So things are looking really good. Yeah, and talking about, I should just give the mic to the sheriff, but he's as bad as Lance, I think.
Let's not go that far.
Kidding aside, so that impact that would have financially would be that we could bring back a number, the majority of our housed out inmates being fully staffed. So that's the hope. Right now, we're maximizing our electronic monitoring to the best that we can with the people that are eligible for it right now. I believe we've got roughly 80 out, I believe. No, out of housing, or out of county housing, I believe.
Yeah, it's like 68 today.
And then I think we've got 19 on monitoring. So, but we could definitely bring those back from out of county housing, the majority of them. But there again, it's going to take several months to get people trained up and through jail academy and things like that.
I think the next step that we need to take is we really need to examine our inmate population, how long they've been in custody, and what the delays are getting them through the system. If we can figure that out next, that'll be the next big improvement we can make in why we house and how we house. So as an example, today we have 288 inmates we're responsible for. Some are on monitors, some are in our facility, some are housed out in other places. Of those 288 inmates, only 29 of them are sentenced. So that ratio is very skewed. And I know Marathon County has done a really good job of as a criminal justice system, clearing up our cases, and we're moving cases through faster. I met with the DA for lunch last week, and we talked through some of this. But we realized that we need to start now focusing, now that we've got a handle on some of these other things, this needs to be the next thing we're looking at. So I met with Michael Schultz, the new data officer for the county, and I've asked her to help me understand the data and how to articulate or explain where we're missing the mark, because the ratio of sentenced to unsentenced and the length of stay of people in our jail really is significant. And there are very few other counties that have this issue. One that comes to mind right away that I know is an issue is Brown County, and I know they're kind of going through something similar. But I think that needs to be our next big push. If we're looking at managing the jail population, we need to understand that.
Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you all. That's good news. 8, next meeting, date and time announcements and future agenda items. Community members are asked to bring ideas for future discussion. Next meeting is Tuesday, March 12th, 2024, 1:30, and I will take number 8 or 9. Motion made. 1 second, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried. Again, Lance, I'm sorry, it was a lot of stuff at your expense today, but you're not here, so that's to be expected.
That's expected. Yes. Have a good day, everyone. Take care.
Aye.